Amazing. All right, well, we'll get started with our next session. So I'm really excited to introduce Cami Goldhammer on revitalizing culture through breast and chest feeding. And especially very happy to be doing this during Indigenous Milk Medicine Week. As Cami just mentioned, she was just on a session, so thank you for joining us. So Cami is the founding executive director of Hummingbird Indigenous Family Services and creator and lead instructor for Indigenous Lactation Counselor Training. So welcome, Cami. Thank you for being here. I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. All right. I'm Petuashtemi Takiapi, Cami Goldhammer, Makiapi, Damakota Wia, Sisituan, Wapetuan Hamacha, Seattle Ewati. So good day, relatives. It's noon here, so I'm just about afternoon here in Seattle. My name's Cami Goldhammer, and I am Sisseton. I grew up though in Seattle's urban Native community, so I'm grew up in the urban community here in the land of the Duwamish people. Like I said, I'm a Dakota woman, so you see her pronouns, and I'm Sisseton. And I'm a licensed clinical social worker, IBCLC, or internationally board certified lactation consultant, and a full spectrum Indigenous doula, and just do a lot of work around breastfeeding and birth justice in throughout Indian country. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to talk to you all about breast and chest feeding on our second day of Indigenous Milk Medicine Week. So I know that this conference has been going on for the last 2 days, or yesterday and today, but I hope you can join us over at Indigenous Milk Medicine Collective on social media, so Facebook and Instagram, where we just have like a ton of information, some really great sessions. We start out every day with a sunrise ceremony from different community members around Indian country, and then have different educational offerings. So it's just, it's been really good. And I'm really excited to be here with you all to talk about revitalizing culture through breast and chest feeding. So thank you for the opportunity. I have now it's probably about, okay, great. It's 12:05. So we have, I know the goal is to go until the 50, right? Like after the hour, and we have some time in there for question and answers. But I actually, in setting up this presentation, I kind of was like, maybe we can kind of keep it more conversational and kind of open up an opportunity to ask questions during this session too. It doesn't have to just be at the end. But kind of the way I want to break this down is by talking a little bit about about why milk is important, and kind of what's so special about breast milk or human milk, and why is it especially important to our Indigenous babies. And some of you may have heard me speak before where I've talked about this, so it might be some review, but for a lot of you, it also might be somewhat new information or confirming information. So I want to talk about, again, why is milk important for our Indigi babies? And then also talk a little bit, so that'll be kind of from the science perspective, and then also talk about it from our cultural perspective, which of course we know that science is constantly catching up what we've always known as Indigenous people, right? Through our cultural practices and what has been taught. So, there's so many things, especially in maternal child health. And I know you've heard some really incredible speakers over the last day and a half too around, there's so many things that it's we've known this, right? We've known this, but it's just now kind of mainstream society is catching up to things that we've known since the beginning of time. So then I kind of wanted to talk about some of the cultural teachings that I've learned and had and have permission to kind of share with a broader audience too, when it comes to nursing or breastfeeding and chest feeding. And then again, we can answer any questions or open things up for folks to ask any information. But I just, the first thing I'd like to do is just acknowledge the language that we're using in the title of this presentation, because oftentimes I'll get asked, like, what is chest feeding? Like, why would you, like, why do you use both, say, breast and chest feeding? Kind of like, what is the difference there? And is there a difference? And chest feeding is a term that is being used more and more often for its inclusive language. And so, we have certainly, been on a re-journey, because again, this was all very normal. Our two-spirit relatives were absolutely like integrated in normal relatives in our society, and no one ever questioned that for a long time. And then there was a series, there was a due to colonialism and things like that, there was like a shift in some of those beliefs, right? And so the term chest feeding really refers to all people who provide milk to their babies, right? Or milk medicine to their babies in some form or another. We recognize that not just women give birth, not just moms breastfeed, right? Like, it's not just that way, that we do have two-spirit relatives that may not identify as women or moms, or their breasts, like their chest as breasts. And so this is just one of the many ways that we can use language to include everybody in all the ways that they provide milk medicine to their babies. And I think I'm remembering when I was looking at the agenda that there's a presentation on this. Isn't that right, Alicia? Is there a presentation on language later?
With the home visiting program.
Oh, okay. I was thinking there was one on like inclusive language and two-spirit relatives or something.
Oh, yes. Sorry about that.
Was that yesterday?
Yeah. You're
okay,
right.
Cool. Okay, cool. So
Mhm.
great. So yeah, I just wanted to call that out. And this is in no way erasure of women, because women are, of course, included in chest feeding, right? Like, we have chest and everything too. All right. So I'm going to move forward. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about is kind of like why human milk is important for our little indige babies. One of the things that, I often say is that the foundation of a healthy community is its life givers and babies, and the foundation of healthy parents, healthy moms, or birthing people and babies is human milk. And that yesterday we had a really incredible presentation on the intersection between nursing and breast and chest feeding and environmental justice, and how, the health of our world, of our planet, of Inamaka, Mother Earth, right, is directly connected to the health of life givers and babies in our communities. And so it's kind of like no wonder that we see overall fairly low breastfeeding or lactation rates in the Native community. So just, kind of like to go over those, we in general see about 70% of Native people at birth initiating breastfeeding. There's a pretty significant disparity there, because when we look at the rates of white people, they breastfeed about 90% initiate breastfeeding. So initiation means just starting out breastfeeding. And so again, we already have a disparity where about 20% less Native people are choosing to do it from the jump, right? Like from the start. And then it's just really hard to keep going. The current recommendations are that 100% of babies are exclusively breastfed. So that means receive nothing but human milk for the first 6 months of their life. And a little less than 10% of Native babies are meeting that minimum recommendation. And so, it's challenging. And we know that again, that there's this kind of like lower breastfeeding rates in the community, and that is very much connected to the overall health and well-being of our communities, right? So I wanted to just kind of talk about some of the things and why human milk is important. And I'm just going to try and keep I'm just going to try and keep my eye on the chat too. Okay, cool. Just some kind of confirmation around language in there too from another lactation counselor. Cool. Okay, so again, I just wanted to go over first, like kind of the science side of things and how we know that, or how human milk is especially important for our Indigenous babies, right? It's important for all babies, but when we're talking about disparities, we know that we're disproportionately affected by a lot of illnesses, chronic illness, mortality, and of course, morbidity, which includes those types of illnesses. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was just that the baby, this is a baby's first food. This is a traditional food, and our baby's first traditional food. And that's something that is really unique in the way that that many of us in the Indigenous community talk about breastfeeding and human milk. So it is a traditional food, and breastfeeding or chest feeding is in itself a ceremony, and often like the first ceremony that a baby will experience after they're born. They're kind of like born, and the place that they would typically go to, assuming it's not medically contraindicated to go there, is to the parent's chest, where they would nurse, usually within minutes being born. Now, the way babies are born today is a little bit different than they historically were being born. And so hospitals and certain medical interventions certainly can impact breastfeeding and a baby's ability to breastfeed or breastfeed well. But in most cases, we find that babies are going to be pretty hungry after making that journey from the stars, and be really ready to eat. So it's that first traditional food. The other thing that I really want to point out in the way that many Indigenous people talk about breastfeeding, including myself, and this is how I talk about it in the Indigenous Lactation Counselor program as well, is that breastfeeding is a traditional practice or a cultural practice. Mainstream society will kind of have us look at breastfeeding or chest feeding as one of two ways to feed a baby, right? You can bottle feed or you can breastfeed. You can give a baby human milk or you can give a baby artificial infant formula. It's kind of like one of two options, and that's that. And what I really want to stress in this community, since we all are either Indigenous or serve Indigenous people as healthcare providers, that we really have to talk about breastfeeding as a cultural practice. And the reason we know it's a cultural practice is how we learn how to breastfeed. So when we look at communities around the world who have maintained the tradition of breastfeeding, so these are Indigenous communities that have 100% of the babies are breastfed or receive human milk, they've been largely untouched by kind of like European or Western society. Those moms or those parents have all the same worries that American moms have or Canadian moms have. They worry about milk supply. They, they have sore nipples, they get mastitis, they get blebs, they get, abscesses, they kind of experience all of the things, right? Except for they have 100% breastfeeding rate. And so the one thing that researchers found that they have that we don't necessarily have here is grandmothers that breastfed, right? They don't have kind of that army or that community of aunties that surround that person after they have their baby, who has that traditional knowledge of how to handle some of these problems. And so when a parent does worry about their milk supply, they have, again, a group of aunties that are going to normalize for that we understand why you're worried. And this is why you're in bed for 40 days. This is why we're feeding you these foods. This is why we're cleaning your home and taking care of your older children, is so that you can build a good milk supply. And for many of us nowadays, we don't have that privilege, right? We might live far away from our relatives. Our relatives might not be healthy for us to be around or be people who we find support. Our families may have been impacted by premature premature mortality, right? Like we have, have our elders pass away at so early. I think about that in my family. My unchi, my grandma, passed away from COVID in 2021. And my cousins and I are now the matriarchs in our family. We're the oldest females in our family. And we're, I'm 42, the youngest is 38. Like we're too young to be the oldest in the family, the oldest women in the family, but that's just how it is, right? Like that's kind of the life and how we're impacted by morbidity in other ways. And so a lot of us don't necessarily have that connection. Again, we might live in urban areas and our family is somewhere else. Or like many of us, our mothers and grandmothers and aunties didn't breastfeed. And so they don't have the knowledge of how to solve these problems in their brain. One of the things, because it's a traditional practice, is I believe it lives in their soul or in their heart, like it lives here. But a lot of times what we have to do is bring it alive in the brain so it becomes like spoken knowledge, right? And so that's something I just want to say, like you'll hear me kind of talk about when we start talking about cultural practices and breastfeeding. Some of the things that breastfeeding does is it builds a baby's immune system. Colostrum is our first milk. It is there when when we are pregnant. So we start making it around the second trimester, early to mid second trimester. And we make really small amounts of colostrum, but it's all that a baby needs. This again is the immune layer in our milk. So we actually always have colostrum in the milk. It never goes away. It just becomes kind of diluted with sugar and water and hundreds of other ingredients that are in human milk. When a baby is in utero, its immune system is directly connected to the parent's immune system. The placenta provides the immune protections for that baby. And then once that baby is born, and they're exposed to kind of the environment that they're in, colostrum takes over and provides those immune protections, because babies don't have a strong immune system. They're born very, very early compared to other mammals. And when other mammals deliver their babies, because their heads are so big and we walk upright, right? All of those things. That's why we carry babies or deliver babies so little, and we parent them for so long, because we'd have to deliver like 7-year-olds or something if we delivered the same time a puppy delivered, let's say, or a dog delivered puppies. So again, it provides those immune protections. We collect immunities that we need our baby to have through various ways. We collect it as parents by living in the environment we live on, getting touched by people, coughed on by people, getting exposed to germs on the little payment pads at the grocery store, right? And then we touch our face or, whatever. And that kind of like tells the body like, okay, you've been exposed to this cold strain. Let's go ahead and start making immunities toward that, to fight that illness, right? And it has been shown that immunities show up in milk within 2 hours of a parent's exposure. So it's just really, really incredible how quickly this works. And so we do know that babies who are breastfed, oftentimes the term that's used is quote healthier, but it really just means that babies that are breastfed do get sick less often, but they do get sick, and so they tend to be sick less severely and recover quicker as well. And so that's something to keep in mind. So it really is just this extension of that baby's immune system. We have protections against chronic illness. Diabetes and heart disease are kind of the number one things that always come to mind here. These are our top causes of death of Native adults, right? In some communities, it's estimated that up to 60% of Native adults have diabetes, type 2 diabetes specifically. And breastfeeding goes a long way in offering those protections. It's estimated that for every year a parent breastfeeds, that their risk of chronic illness, specifically diabetes and heart disease, is reduced by 40 to 90%. And that's why so many of breastfeeding kind of like promotional things that are out there that fund a lot of, like our good health and wellness in Indian country, things like that. Those are like largely diabetes prevention dollars at the CDC. That's kind of like saying like, whoa, breastfeeding is important. We see it as an important preventative factor. And so we're really wanting to get to like the very beginning of that. For parents that are experiencing gestational diabetes, their chance of developing type 2 diabetes after pregnancy is actually significantly increased. So if you have gestational diabetes, you're more likely to develop type 2 diabetes at the end of your pregnancy. And that risk is reduced by about 50% if you breastfeed. And so there's also protections for that parent as well. SIDS prevention is also another really important one. This is actually some part of my pathway into breastfeeding and lactation world almost 15 years ago at this point was through SIDS prevention. And I saw my dear friend and mentor and really kind of Auntie Shelley Means on here, who is co-coordinator for the Native American Women's Dialogue on Infant Mortality. And I kind of joined that group really on in my lactation journey. I think my daughter was maybe 1 year old at the time. Because I was, learning more about breastfeeding and how important it is for SIDS prevention, and also learning about how low our breastfeeding rates are in the community and how high our SIDS rates are in the community, right? And the disproportionality there. And so I really kind of wanted to be a part of like providing more lactation support to community members, specifically to reduce infant death. There's a couple of ways that we see SIDS as being, or breastfeeding as protective against SIDS. One of the ways is just kind of bumping back up to this first one around baby's immune system, that, we don't know what causes SIDS. That's kind of what makes SIDS is that it's just this unexplained infant death that occurs in the first year of life. To some babies, and Native babies are about 2 to 3 times more likely to die of SIDS than white babies. And we're, learning more, but there's some thoughts that, or some research that's showing that when doing autopsies of babies that pass away of SIDS, that they had or may have kind of low-grade respiratory illnesses, that paired with some additional stressors and being high risk age-wise kind of puts them in a position where they're more at risk for SIDS. And so knowing that breastfeeding is protective in a lot of ways when it comes to the immune system, but it's especially good at respiratory infections. I mean, that's really where like breastfeeding shines, is in those like respiratory illnesses, sinus infections, ear infections, colds, flus, those RSV, right? Like those kinds of things. And so that's one way that we see breastfeeding as protective against SIDS. The other one, and this is one that I just like really love to talk about, is waking up. The way breastfeeding, and this is often a complaint about breastfeeding, is how a baby doesn't sleep as long as when they get formula. And the thing that I really like to remind parents and remind providers, because I actually see in community a lot of providers encouraging parents to, quote, sleep train or stop feeding their baby overnight once they hit 4 months, or once they hit a certain weight, double their birth weight. I mean, it's the completely arbitrary things that there is zero evidence to support, but I hear it all of the time from community members. I've worked with thousands of parents over the years. And so this is something that's really, really common. But I want to remind parents and community and providers that waking up is a life-saving skill of a baby. Right? When we look at our traditional practices, for many of us, we have beliefs that when baby, kind of baby comes from the star world, which is where our ancestors are as well. And when baby sleeps, that's in dreams, that's where they go and visit, right? That's when we might get to visit our ancestors too. And so what we really want is that baby to come back though, right? We want them to go and visit their ancestors, go and visit those future relatives that are going to soon be born, but then we want them to come back. And that's where like waking up is such an important thing. And breast milk really facilitates this, right? Breast milk is easily digested. It is made at the perfect amount that a baby needs. And it is completely normal for a baby to nurse every 45 minutes, hour and a half, 2 hours, right? We might get really lucky with a 3 or 4 hour stretch, but I would expect a normal infant or child to wake up well into the second year of life. And that is SIDS prevention. It is. And when we kind of like introduce formula to make a baby sleep longer, or put cereal in their bottle to make a baby sleep longer, or do something like sleep train, just kind of refuse to feed a baby at night, that does contribute to their SIDS risk. And so that's something that, I really love to talk about. And we have, human milk protects against reproductive cancers. This is a protection for a lactating person, specifically around breast cancer is where we really see some significant protections, which is becoming more and more common in our Indigenous communities. And so there's, again, different thoughts on this and why that is, but one of them is just, exposure to estrogen. So a lot of reproductive cancers are connected directly to high levels of estrogen in our body. And estrogen is a milk suppressant. And so when people are lactating, they actually have very little estrogen in their bodies. We are almost menopausal during that time. And that's kind of where we see it, right? It just kind of decreases the overall exposure to estrogen as long as you're nursing. The other thing that I think is a really interesting theory is that because the breasts are so busy making milk, those cancer cells in the breast just don't have the opportunity to get into trouble, right? They're just kind of like busy doing other things like making milk. And so I think that's kind of a really interesting theory too, and would love to learn more about that. We also have kind of like optimal attachment and bonding. Babies that are breastfed are held about 50% more over the lifetime, in their first year of life than babies who aren't breastfed. And so this is something that even if we are bottle feeding or working with bottle feeding families, really stressing the importance of holding the baby when you feed them, switching sides on the left and the right, those kinds of things that the baby would get when they breastfed is really helpful for that baby's brain development and overall attachment and bonding. The other thing that we see with attachment and bonding is my favorite hormone, which is oxytocin, which is the love hormone. And oxytocin is also the hormone that makes our milk flow, or our milk let down. And again, oxytocin is a bonding hormone. It's that love hormone. It's your warm, fuzzy feeling hormone that when you are falling in love, or when, for me, my Unchi is my oxytocin memory. Like whenever I would be with her, I just felt so loved, so secure, so warm. Her hugs were like nothing else, right? But that's oxytocin that does that. And a parent and a baby who are nursing will cycle oxytocin back and forth. And then the really cool thing is those of us that get to be around those dyads also have higher levels of oxytocin, which I think is why I kind of joke that this is why I do this work, is I'm just chasing that oxytocin high the whole time. Like, I just love it. I love being around new families. And it really does kind of keep me like emotionally available, I think, because of all the oxytocin that I'm exposed to. And then we also see protections again for maternal mental health. Contrary to popular belief, when breastfeeding goes well, it's very protective against maternal mental health. When breastfeeding doesn't go well, it's actually a contributing factor to maternal mental health illnesses. And so this is not, the solution to that is not to not breastfeed, right? Or to have someone stop breastfeeding. It's actually to provide them support so that they can meet their breastfeeding goals, so that they can continue to get those protections for their health. Some of the ways we see breastfeeding as protective around mental health is around sleep. Again, it's people don't necessarily realize it, but breastfeeding moms sleep about 1 to 2 hours more a night than bottle feeding parents. And that's because we can nurse our baby and sleep at the same time, right? So there's, that kind of helps us with getting more sleep, or new parents getting more sleep. So yeah, those are just some of my favorite things. I don't like to call them benefits, because this is all the biological norm. Our biological norm as Indigenous people is to be healthy, to not be diabetic, to not have heart disease, to not have cancer, right? To be fully bonded and attached with each other, fully mentally available. That is our norm. That's the way our ancestors wanted us to be. And so I don't like to kind of talk about this as like, these are benefits to breastfeeding. It's kind of more like that's the baseline, right? Everything should be compared to it. And so there's really just risks with not breastfeeding. And so next, I just wanted to kind of talk about breastfeeding as a cultural practice. So, some of the things that I have learned over the years in traveling to lots of different communities is the important, just kind of like what breastfeeding does or lactation does for us culturally. I already mentioned that breastfeeding or chest feeding is a cultural practice. Again, it's passed down from generation to generation. But we also have a lot of teachings around what we actually pass down. And a lot of teachings tell us that it's a lot more than just milk, right? I got to hear from one Ojibwe elder who shared the teaching of nursing is how a parent passes on their light to a child, and that medicine people can see light, like light living in all of us, and that light is the milk that fed us, right? And I'm so analytical sometimes and so sciencey that I'm always kind of like, well, what does that mean? Like, I can't see light. Like, I don't know what that is. I wasn't breastfed. Do I not have a light? Like, what do we know here? But what we know is that when we nurse, that it permanently kind of like changes or contributes to our DNA, I guess is kind of more the language. And it helps to build cells and skin and develop a brain, right? Like all of this stuff. And so what we pass down to our child through our milk is in us forever, right? Like it does live in us forever. And so I think it's just a really beautiful teaching. There's also teachings around passing on our story or our song. And that was something that I definitely, it's been a long time since I breastfed, but I breastfed for a really long time, both my girls. And I returned to work pretty early with my first. So she was about 7 weeks when I returned to work. And I remember, being away from her all day and then coming home and nursing and us just sitting there. And we were communicating with each other. Like we were silently, we weren't talking because she was a baby, right? Like she couldn't talk, but I felt like I was telling her, like passing on this story, telling her about my day through my milk. And she was receiving that and kind of, taking that in. And so I thought, I think that this is also just a really beautiful teaching that we have around passing on those stories and those songs. And that, oftentimes like our milk really replicates like the waters of the earth. And so we have a lot of teachings around the way lactation and water rights and water sovereignty connect with each other too. So I think I'm going to end there. I think I have about 4 more minutes, but I'm happy to answer, just have more time for questions. But thank you all so much for your time. I really appreciate your attention and you being here and sticking with us at the end of the day too.
Okay. Thank you so much, Cami. Yeah, we'll open it up now for questions if anyone wants to unmute themselves or leave it in the chat. I do have one question and I'll put it in the chat. So awesome. Well, the one question I have was, in the context of our theme on Native maternal health promotion, what messages or key takeaways do you hope participants, and including myself, will carry with them as, we reflect on revitalizing culture through breast and or chest feeding?
Yeah, I think like my main takeaway, especially kind of knowing that I know we have a lot of people on this session and we probably all represent a lot of different sectors within Indigenous health, right? Whether you're an Indigenous parent who's received healthcare, or you're a provider or administrator, right? There's so many different roles that we play. I think the key takeaways that I want folks to know is, one, that breastfeeding is important. Like, it's just not something we can throw away. And that's something that I think we've largely done, and it's not our fault. Like, I really, I have a whole other, I could do like a 3-hour talk on the impacts of historical trauma and unresolved grief on breastfeeding directly, and so that's like a whole other thing. Cause I really want to say, like, it's not our fault that we don't know this information or it's not readily available to us. As a society, we've really kind of for the last 150, 200 years have kind of not been able to access a lot of information when it comes to breastfeeding, or learn this information. And so, I really just want to stress how important it is that about every, let's see, what do I want to say? About 60% of people don't meet their breastfeeding goals, right? 60%. Like I said earlier, or actually I may have said this in the other presentation, so maybe I didn't say it earlier, but I really, breastfeeding and the success of breastfeeding is a community's responsibility. It is not the responsibility of the parent. They just had a baby, right? Like, they just had a baby. They just went to the stars and back to bring their baby there. It breaks people open in a way, and they are recovering. It is up to all of us to support that parent. And so that's something that I really want people to know, is to this is our job. This is our responsibility, and it is our obligation to our most vulnerable relatives, which are babies and parents, right? And birthing people. So that's one thing I would say, as far as takeaways, and to, please reach out. I know that, sometimes getting this information is a little hard. I thought about talking more about the Indigenous lactation counselor training and things like that, but that is something that, folks who identify as Indigenous can access, which is a 5-day, 45-hour course that myself and my breast friend, Kimberly Morsales, who's a Navajo lactation consultant, her and I teach together all over Indian country. Again, it's a 5-day, 45-hour lactation counselor training specifically for people that identify as Indigenous, and it centers Indigenous people in all of that. And so that's a great way to get some additional knowledge out there to be able to support families. And then really, I put my email, I have 2 emails that I put up here because I have my Hummingbird Indigenous Family Services, which is the nonprofit I'm the executive director of, but then I also have Indigenous BF Counselor, which you can email me at either, but I'm happy to answer any questions or support you in creating better breastfeeding practices in your community. And there are so many resources out there. This is literally a time to be alive as an Indigenous birth worker. There's amazing work happening all over Indian country when it comes to lactation. And so if you look for it, there's probably something out there in your community. And if not, like, let us know and we'll try and find it for you too. But yeah.
So thank you so much, Cami. We do have a few more minutes. So I know it's Indigenous Milk Medicine Week. So I want to take some time, maybe learn more about what are some activities or initiatives that are being done to promote the understanding and appreciation of breast and chest feeding as a vital cultural practice.
Yeah, I love it. So yes, Indigenous Milk Medicine Week started yesterday. So it's August 8th through the 14th every year. This is our 5th year, which is really exciting. And this year's theme is From the Stars to a Sustainable Future. And the kind of like that, we all have different interpretations of like what that means to us. I will tell you all that I made up the theme this year. My choice, it was my choice. And so I had kind of like a vision for like why I suggested it when we were talking about different themes. We all make suggestions. But for me, like what it really kind of boils down to is that, like, I believe, again, our Dakota teachings teach us that our babies come from the stars. And they come from the stars with infinite wisdom, right? Like they choose their parents, knowing our past, present, and future. And I think that's such an empowering teaching for parents to hear, right? Because so often we think we're not good enough, right? Or that our baby would be better off with someone else. And that's just not true. They picked you, right? Like they picked you with all the knowledge in the world. And I think, it's just such a great thing to learn about. And so kind of this idea of like from the stars, that these babies make their way from the stars to here on earth, and our milk builds that foundation for that sustainable future, right? Like for social, emotional, spiritual, physical health, and as far also like environmental health. I mean, there's just so many things that it's connected to. And so that's kind of what it means to me. Again, others might have different interpretations of what it means, which is the beauty of themes. But we have tons of activities. Thanks, Alicia, for putting the link in the chat. But we have activities every day. And then individual communities also do things. There's incredible activities happening in Wisconsin, Minnesota. Like, it's just really cool, like all this stuff that's happening. But we start out every day with a sunrise ceremony, which is an awesome way to start the day, which is just starting our day off in a good way with a different speaker or elder or medicine person or knowledge keeper that shares some good words for us. That might be in the form of a song, a prayer, whatever that looks like. And then we typically have some educational offerings. And so yesterday we had 2 sessions, one on the intersection of environmental justice and breastfeeding. We did another one, which was so good, on DMER, which is dysphoric milk ejection reflex, which really briefly is this kind of phenomena that Kim and I are seeing happening more and more in Indigenous communities, where when someone's milk lets down, so the milk starts flowing, that they actually experience feelings of dysphoria or sadness. And it actually can range from like feeling like nausea to actually having suicidal thoughts just for the like 15 seconds of a milk letdown. So it's this really confusing thing that parents experience, and they don't really know what's happening. And so we had a really incredible talk yesterday about that. Earlier today, the session I did before this was Ask an IBCLC that Kim and I did, where we just answered breastfeeding questions from community. But our schedule is on the website and on social media. We have shirts. There's a few shirts left, beautiful artwork. And so definitely like check it out and join us all week, because we have a lot of really good information that's going to be shared over the next couple of days.
So thank you so much, Cami. I see one more question. Let's see. By Cheryl. And she asked, do you know if your training that you will fulfill the requirements that USDA FNS has WIC programs need to do?
You know, that's actually a good question, Cheryl. It's good to see you. I actually don't know. I should look and see. I mean, we're a 45-hour course. Our course is accepted for someone that wants to become an IBCLC, for continuing ed, for CLC courses. We really see it as, you know, it's an equivalent to any other 45-hour course. But I'm not sure, and maybe you and I can connect later to kind of see if it is. And if it's not, maybe work together to get it approved. I kind of can be really rogue when it comes to this stuff of like, I don't need to be certified by the government, you know, for anything. Like my community certifies me and this is, you know, that, but I also don't want to be a barrier, you know, to people getting this education. And so if that would open up the door for some Indigenous people that are working within WIC, and for WIC to send them to our training, I would love to do that. But yeah, I'm not sure what the requirements are. So we can definitely, I'm happy to look into that.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like Cheryl will be reaching out via email. So
awesome. Cool. Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it. Yeah, and then I saw hey, Jacob, it's good to see you too. I see Jacob's comment too, like wondering if there's an epigenetic response associated with historical trauma and traumatic stress. And I 100% believe there is. And I believe breastfeeding can heal that too. You know, and that is through breastfeeding that we can heal that epigenetic response. And so that's a lot of someday, maybe I'll do a PhD, but that would literally be my thesis. So yeah, maybe.
Let's see. And just everyone showing their love. So thank you everyone for your questions and sweet comments to Cami. It looks like I'll conclude this session, Cami.
Cool. Yeah. Stop. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And I hope everyone has a great, not everyone, but I hope you have a great rest of your day. I really always so much enjoy working with you and learning from you, Cami. And I hope you have a great day and week, and Indigenous Milk Medicine Week. But yeah, thank you for being here.
All right. Yeah. Toksha, everyone. Thanks for having me. I have another meeting, so heading off.
We'll
have
see
a
you,
great.
man.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Cami. All right. So far today, we heard from a variety of speakers and on their work on cultural practices and how our cultural practices continue not only nourish our physical well-being, but also our emotional, spiritual, and mental well-being.